Hello, everyone. Welcome to our live stream on rewiring the brain from anxiety. So great to be here with all of you. So, you guys, I'm really excited to introduce our very special guest today. We actually just met for the first time in person approximately 25 minutes ago. And then we discovered that the Wi-Fi at his beautiful clinic in rural Ireland wasn't strong enough, so we dashed to this executive office room at a nearby hotel, and here we are doing the call from here. So it's been a little bit of a journey, but thank God the Wi-Fi is strong. This is a brother that has been inspiring me very deeply for about a year and a half now. I was, as many of you know, I've done hundreds of hours of research on how to heal the nervous system, how to rewire the brain, neuroplasticity, nervous system self-regulation. At one point in time, probably about a year and a half ago, I was listening to a podcast from a pre and perinatal educator interview, and then I started drifting off to sleep. And then maybe like an hour later, I kind of like woke up, and I heard this man talking and just downloading all of this, potent knowledge and wisdom and insight about healing anxiety, about neuroplasticity, about neuroanatomy, all this stuff. And I was like, who is this guy? And I was like half awake, half asleep. Anyway, I ended up Googling him. And now here he is.
Here you are.
Here he is, yeah. So I'm so excited to introduce Ian Wright.
Pleased to be here.
Is a very special being. He has been on his Dharma path since the age of 18, which is so rare. So the level of mastery that you can, the level that you can collect when you start your Dharma at such a young age is very is rare and precious. He's been on a path of osteopathy and also cranial sacral as an educator, as a teacher for decades. He's written 2 books, one of which I have been voraciously reading, and I listened to a lot of his audios, and just one of his audios that I've listened to at least 3 times, and I feel like I could listen to it 5 times and just be getting way more information. It's just like jam-packed with information about neuroanatomy, neuroplasticity, working with the different parts of our brain to rewire the brain from anxiety and create more peace and ease and trust and a feeling of safety, and reset our baseline state. Even if we've come from a background of PTSD or chronic adversity or whatever the case may be, he's got a lot of tools, a lot of wisdom, a lot of knowledge, and a beautiful, compassionate heart. So I would love to start just by asking you a little bit about your background. You got into this at the age of 18. You've been studying osteopathy and craniosacral throughout your 20s.
Yeah, I've, as with all these things in life, I fell into doing what I do, studying osteopathy. I didn't have many real inclination towards it. I knew I wanted to do something that helped people, and that was really, I was 18, I had no idea. And but I started this course and I couldn't even pronounce osteopathy when I went for the interview. It was so funny. And I got in, and partly because the course was in the centre of London, in Trafalgar Square, and it was a great place to be. And I thought, I'll try this. It sounds different from what everyone else is doing. Anyway, in the process of the study, I really fell in love with the philosophy of osteopathy, which is about holism. It's about treating a person as a wholeness. And I found that very beautiful, actually. And so actually I fell in love with osteopathy after studying it and after working really a lot with children and pediatrics, which is an area I specialize quite a lot in. And from the get-go, I fell for it, and I started teaching, especially certain things like cranial osteopathy and pediatric osteopathy, from my mid-20s, and I was working. All the other teachers who were, gosh, years and years older than me. I was like the baby, but being the baby when I was teaching in these teams of people, the elders would pull me aside and teach me all the tricks, which was fantastic. So I was very fortunate in my education postgraduate to work with the very best, actually, osteopaths in the world, and I've been very lucky on that path, really. And and I'm still working. I've just been practicing half an hour ago.
Amazing. And as we were talking in the car on the way over here, you were mentioning that you've been on a path of really supporting people as a healer, in hands-on healing and also distance healing during COVID. But you said you've been getting more and more interested in empowering people to on the self-healing path, and that's what we're going to focus on a little bit here in our interview today, is giving people tools, putting some of the tools in people's hands. And I know you created a couple of books, one of which is giving a lot of people tools to work with different parts of the brain, like the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, hippocampus, hypothalamus. And so
and let me start by saying I have worked obviously for 30 plus years now, working to help people treating extremely complex and difficult cases. Let's talking just about anxiety. When I was first practicing 30 plus years ago, you would be working, for example, with teenagers with anxiety, with adults with anxiety. And that age range would get younger and younger and younger. And so, there would be 7-8-year-olds with anxiety. Now we have children who are so young with anxiety. And that's put down to a whole different realm of things. A lot of it is to do with social pressures and social media and everything that we take in. And but it's a huge issue, anxiety. But on that subject, because I've always worked to heal people, to make it all better. And in the last few years especially, people have been saying to me, but what can I do for myself? And so I'm treating them. We have, a 20-minute healing session, doing whatever, online or wherever in the practice. And they say at the end, is there something I can do? And I've got a waiting room full of people outside. So I was like going, well, actually, there's a lot that you can do for yourself, but I can't tell you in such little time. So what I started to do was do little voice recordings for people to give them practices. They're normally kind of sensory meditation practices and other practices which help regulate the brain and help bring people to a place of peace, and et cetera, and would send them out to people. And it'd be easy, so they could have my voice talking them through a process. And then I put that together on in an online course format, and then a book, etc., where it comes together. And so actually, if someone has, say, chronic anxiety, you have to go through a process actually of unlearning what has happened to the brain. Because what happens is, anxiety can start very early on.
In the womb.
In utero, and absolutely, because in utero you take
perinatal.
You can take on. If mum is in a state of tension, it affects a lot of the neuroendocrine system of the baby as well as the mother, and so you are pre-programming or kindling. You could call the nervous system. So. Yes, you have perinatal, any shock in the birth process has a massive effect. The child, the newborn child, as their vision opens up and they engage with the world, their first responses to the world, your first reflex to the world is whether something is nurture or whether that something is threat or that person is threat. And so it's very simple. Everything that we begin to engage with life about is is this nurture, like the breast, or is it threat, something I have to move away from, something that's hot or something that doesn't feel right? And this is wired into our nervous systems very early on. For example, if you have a mother who unfortunately has postnatal depression or is overwhelmed, or if the baby has intense reflux or colic and they're in distress the whole time, and the whole bonding process, okay, can be disturbed. So a baby can respond to the look in a caregiver's eyes, okay? And if that isn't if there isn't a sense of nurture and love in that bonding process, they can actually start to have a physiological effect. And so this is, of course, a baby and a child up to very young will not be able to have any conscious processing of emotion, right? Everything is subcortical, meaning you get an immediate reaction, right? So you take in the visual stimulation, it gets wired through the thalamus, and then it goes straight maybe to the amygdala, which is like a part of the nervous system that deciphers whether there is threat or nurture, okay? And a threat will create a response in the HPA, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, of fright or shock or whatever. So you're getting these patterns that are pre-programmed very early on. And if you have a nervous system that has been kindled, as in a kindling, like lighting a fire, okay, so there is some aggravation in it, it sets the tone in this hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis high. So what happens is the baby responds to the world as if there is threat. And the threat, the problem as you get older and we become conscious and we engage with the environment of the world, our filter of how we see the world has been programmed quite early on. And so what happens later, though, is the HPA axis and some other parts of the nervous system, the amygdala, are very clever because they allow us to pre-consciously react. So if suddenly some wild animal comes in through the door, right? We can react before we think, oh, that's a wild animal, we have to run. We've already done, we're out the door, okay? That is a brilliant part of our brains, okay? And so that is a threat response, which is pre-cortical, okay? And it's extremely important. But what happens is when our nervous systems become kindled by what we've just talked about, but also by perceived threats. So what is a perceived threat? A perceived threat could be me as a 7-year-old girl not feeling comfortable within their environment because they don't feel pretty enough, because whatever the social media's taught them that they have to look a certain way. They don't feel like they look that way, or whatever. And so that and all of these more subtle things start to become perceived threats. Okay, so you're getting, what happens though is this is pre-conscious, so you're getting responses that you don't even know you're having responses to, and that kindles up that part of the nervous system called the amygdala. And the amygdala actually, as it wires itself up, and it continues to wire itself up through life, it actually literally grows. So in someone who's got chronic anxiety, their amygdalas are bigger, okay? The hippocampus which is a very important part of the brain as well, which tends to allow us to give a contextual memory it gives us context to a situation. So for example, if we have a natural reaction of terror towards a snake, okay, that's an important reaction, right? We need to get away from the snake. But the contextual memory, for example, would be if we were in a zoo and the snake is sitting behind a glass wall. So actually, this contextual memory of actually a glass wall equals safety gives us a contextual memory and allows us to down-regulate that threat response so we don't have a reaction. So the problem is we become overwhelmed with multiple sensory stimuli, then all our beliefs, thoughts, ideas all come in and create this reactivity within our nervous systems, increases the tone, and we walk around in a state of anxiety. Now, everybody has a sense of anxiety within them, can feel anxious at some stage or other. That's a normal situation for us to be, and sometimes it's very relevant. But most of anxiety is a stress response which is elicited for not actually anything that is a threat. So actually we walk around in a place where our nervous systems are in a fright response all day, and that can be quite exhausting and debilitating if you get it in a very serious level, very, seriously debilitating. So the point is, how do you break the cycle? How do you change that pattern of being? And it can be quite difficult, and people do need, and this is why I kind of did this stuff, was because people need a way of doing this for themselves, because I can work to down-regulate their nervous systems, bring them into a place of balance, reintroduce a sense of underlying stillness to their system, which will down-regulate their nervous systems. But what about when they're out in the street and they're getting social anxiety from whatever different causes, or any help, any other kind of form of anxiety? What can you do in the moment? So first of all, I wanted to give some sort of anxiety breaks, which are specific techniques to down-regulate that kind of immediate irritability, just doing some simple vagal breathing, which can downgrade the nervous system, etc., or using specific thought processes, taking you to a different place, bringing your attention to somewhere that brings you a sense of safety.
Mm-hmm. Before we get into that, I have a question.
Great.
And I just want to read a comment here. So Emma says, anxiety from a young age here. Mother had no ability to calm herself. So frantic, tense, crying, meltdown. Yes, Emma, I can relate to that. And Marte says, beautiful and grounding meditation. And Chris said, beautiful. Okay, so I wanted to ask you, Ian, if a baby did not receive a nurturing environment throughout their childhood and formative years, the brain grows differently. We talked a little bit about it, but if you could just sort of give an overview of how the brain ends up being wired differently with regards to, you talked about the amygdala and then also the hippocampus, anything to do with the prefrontal cortex, it grows differently. And from what I understand from studying your work, neuroplasticity can rebuild it back to a more neutral and calm state as an adult through exercises, correct?
Yes. I mean, this is the thing. So we haven't even talked about the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex it's like a higher center. It's to do with executive function. It's to do with regulation. So, for example, very simply, if you get a feeling of fear, right, or a feeling of anxiety, the prefrontal cortex can give you some sort of, it's your consciousness, and your consciousness says, well, hang on, there's nothing actually here that I need to be frightened of. That's your prefrontal cortex engaging and giving you a sense of context and actually giving you a sense of regulation so you can self-regulate, which is a very interesting thing in teenagers where the prefrontal cortex basically rewires itself completely. And that's why teenagers are a whole special breed when it comes to this whole, but actually it's a great opportunity when working with teenagers because it can rewire itself. Now, can we rewire, is there such a thing as neuroplasticity when it comes down to the brain? Actually, every time we learn something new, we are creating synaptic connections. So our brain is wiring itself up. So certain parts of our temporal lobes of our brain, when we learn something new, are changing. So there are certain parts of the brain, classically neuroplasticity is what I would be working with a child who has had, say, some sort of vascular accident in their birth and say they have a tendency towards cerebral palsy. The brain has this huge amount of neuroplasticity where it can remodel itself, okay? And especially in the first 4 years of life. But actually there is a degree of neuroplasticity that can happen when you get older. So for example, if you have a chronic sense of anxiety, this has been shown very clearly, the amygdala literally grows and the hippocampus, which gives you that context to any kind of process of thinking, actually shrinks. Cortisol, which is a stress hormone from the adrenal cortex, actually makes the hippocampus shrink as well. So what can you do to change and remodel the brain? Well, actually, this is the thing. So you start with a process of working when you're in an acute anxious state. But actually, the really hard work is how you set up a day-to-day practice. So you have to develop a practice for yourself, which you can do every day, which has certain elements in which can then work to slowly remodel your brain and take you from an anxious state to a state of peace, where you come from a place of potential stillness and peace. And in that place, the brain can remodel itself. Yeah? And that is really a real thing. You know, it's amazing, really. You wouldn't think so, but it actually is. So yes.
Beautiful. Yeah, I heard someone say recently the brain is remodeling itself really every day.
All the time.
And we get to choose, which direction to remodel it and really work with that proactively.
Yes, we have much more that's the thing, isn't it? We have much more power within ourselves to do so much for ourselves than we think we do.
Definitely. Can you share a little bit more about anything that's relevant for people that are on a self-healing journey? Anything that's relevant for us to know about how we can work with our prefrontal cortex?
Well, our prefrontal cortex, we work with all the time whenever we think about things, so this is this whole process of regulation. I spend a lot of my time with children who are finding it very difficult to regulate. I've done a lot of that all day today. So the problem with that thinking part of the brain is it can actually not be very helpful for us to actually be in that part of the brain. So I wouldn't necessarily think that's the best part of the brain to work with.
You do have a PFC break, wasn't it?
That's one of the kind of breaks, but all that is to using what I just said, really, which is to do using with a conscious executive function of the brain, which can override the amygdala. What happens is when I'm feeling, say, terror of a tiger walking through the door, and my prefrontal cortex says, there are no tigers in Clonmel.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. You're using your brain, your conscious brain, to override an underlying feeling of terror. And we do this all the time, a positive affirmation. Anything that brings your consciousness is your prefrontal cortex, really, is an expression of your consciousness. So your conscious awareness to actually right now, I am safe. I am safe. And there is nothing here that is going to cause me harm. So I can relax, I can settle myself, I can breathe. It's okay. And just stopping and just allowing, that's using your prefrontal cortex, it's the brain, a part of the brain. But the process, though, underlyingly of developing a practice which takes us to a place of quiescence, a place of quiet within ourselves, is very, very important. And I think everybody needs to have some sort. So basically what happens is when we come back into ourselves, when we come to a place of quiet neutral within ourselves, we start to not react to the world, because often we're in a state of reactivity. Our brainwaves are very fast, okay, and they're in very reactive states. And that can be kind of fun, but actually it can be not very comfortable and not feel very safe, actually, because you're in a state almost of survival, aren't you? So actually when you drop your brain back into a place of neutral, a place of quiet, you start to act as opposed to react. And that's coming from a deeper, much more instinctual place, I think. Yeah.
We got some comments here. Chris says, this is fascinating and makes so much sense. Thank you, Chris. Vaughn says, I don't have anxiety. I have ME, chronic fatigue. And okay, so we will get to that question and the question and answer section at the end, Vaughn. And 8 Bill says, when my negative talk stream is active, I talk with my anterior cingulate cortex to downregulate my amygdala. It helps, but I'm not sure why. Do you have any thoughts as to why? So we'll get to that in the question and answer too at the end. Thanks for all the questions. By the way, everything that you put in the chat, I will be sharing with Ian in a Google Doc afterwards. So anything that you want to write to Ian, I'll share with him. And I also wanted
I can answer.
And I also wanted to mention some really awesome news, guys, is that I just got Ian, well, I just invited Ian and he said yes to become a meditation teacher on Insight Timer. So he just uploaded 3 of his tracks a couple of days ago, and they'll be live within the next few days. So drop some hearts if you're excited about Ian being part of our family here on Insight Timer. And I also wanted to say, if you do have questions for Ian in the meantime, because his teacher profile will be live within about 5 days. His name is Ian Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T. And if you look up Ian Wright, you'll see Ireland, and that's the Ian Wright to follow. There's the only one from Ireland. And Emma says, woohoo, excellent. Lisa says, wonderful. Vaughn is clapping. Mira says, what's Ian's Insight Timer name? Martez, would you be willing to write the name Ian Wright in the chat for us, please? Susan says, Lucy says hearts, and Andrew says congrats and welcome, Ian. Ren says yay. Okay, lots of love for Ian in the chat. Wonderful. So I would love, because I love craniosacral. I really love craniosacral. Is there any way that we can work with craniosacral, the concept or the principles of craniosacral as self-healers? And also, is the long tide rhythm concept, does that come from craniosacral? Because I want to talk about the long tide rhythm. I love this phrase, and I just would love for people to, as soon as I heard it, I was like, that's what those of us that have trauma backgrounds, like myself, we need to align with this long tide rhythm.
Yeah, there's an awful lot I can say about this. So the great thing about the tide, you can call it the long tide or the great tide or whatever, and trauma is it works on trust, because the tide comes from the stillness on the horizon or in nature, right? And it comes as a movement. It's like a breath, a mist that comes and breathes through us, right? Informs us, right? But it comes from the outside. And when we've had trauma, sometimes it's hard to trust something that comes from the outside.
Definitely.
Right? But the process is, it's nature, right? And so actually, by practicing some of the techniques to do, I could upload a long tide practice actually
Great.
for this.
Please
because
do.
I have them all
I'm
on
really,
YouTube
really
anyway.
keen.
Yeah. So, okay, the long, I suppose it's the story on the wind, okay? The story on the wind is what the Bushmen of the Kalahari would talk about, okay? So indigenous tribe, the Bushmen of the Kalahari, as documented by Lawrence van der Post, who spent time, the writer who spent time with them, he would talk about their connection to the horizon, okay? And the Bushmen who he would go the hunters of the Kalahari, they would be able to tell a wild animal 100 miles away on the horizon, right? And they said it was the wind that connected them. And interestingly enough, when they went into the towns, they fell into a state of distress, okay? And they said they lost the connection to the wind, right? Now, my understanding of that is the tide. And when I started teaching this tide to people who weren't osteopaths or CST people, and the first course I taught, which was a course on developing sensory awareness, one of the people on the course said, you know, this is not only just important, this is our birthright. Yeah. To connect to this tide. This great tide is like a breath that breathes us, connects us, but most importantly, it connects us deeply and inherently to nature. It comes from nature. Yes. And it is an extremely wonderful... Now, it was noticed, actually, by one of the osteopaths Dr. Roland Becker, his name was, and he would notice that when the patient went into a state of quiet neutral, where their nervous systems had settled and everything went quiet. There was a sense of quiescence that came, and then this great fluid movement, like a light mist, the most delicate thing, would come from the outside and breathe through the person, but also breathe through him, the practitioner. And it was a beautiful experience, and he really talked about that and documented that. One of my teachers, who was a guy called Dr. James Jealous, talked a lot more about this as well, about the tide. And he would sit in nature, and he would allow his attention to, he was sitting once on the head of a valley, and he was sitting there just watching. He loved spending time in nature, and he let his attention just drop to the horizon, and he sensed this subtle, delicate mist come and breathe through him and inform him and connect him. And woof, you feel it. You feel it coming towards you, and it comes through you. It's a very, it's the most delicate, but the most beautiful. There's a softness about it, and it comes from stillness. Okay, so I've done this with him. You send your attention to the stillness on the horizon, and you wait, and then it has a particular tempo and a particular rhythm. It's 90 seconds each phase. Okay, it's 50 seconds each way. Actually, 100 seconds. So 50 seconds it comes from the horizon, breathes through you. It's extremely slow, and then it goes back out. Okay, so it's like this slow breath, this bigger breath that's breathing us. The interesting thing, though, is when our nervous systems are agitated, irritated, and in a far off, basically if our brain, the wavelengths of our brain are going very fast, we lose connection. We, like the Bushmen when they went into towns, we lose connection with the tide, right? So I work in the middle of the country here in rural Tipperary, and the farmers here are naturally, they're not conscious of it, but they're very connected with it. Children naturally are connected with the tide. It's only when they start to become more locked into electronics or locked into thinking, doing, that we lose this connection. This connection, and it connects us intimately with nature. And it is, and this person was right, this is our birthright to be connected. And the interesting thing about it is it slows down our brainwave. It slows down this fluid movement in us, and also our brainwaves drop down into the lower levels, and it's
like
it's
a
a
beta
very,
or delta.
yes, not quite so much as delta, but
Beta.
Yes, exactly, and it just deepens on. You just feel connected. So what happens? You're in practice, and everything goes quiet in the room. The tide comes in, but you can hear. It brings nature. You can hear the birds. That's what brings it in. You can hear the sound of the birds comes in. It's really amazing. You just feel nature connects in. And the thing is when you're working, you get a treatment. So I treat a huge amount of patients every day. I may go up to 40 plus patients, in a day. Maybe 30, and then I'll do, America comes online in the evening, and so, in Australia in the morning. So I'm doing so many people, and people say to me, why aren't you tired? And I'm saying, I'm getting treated the whole time. Yeah.
Amazing.
So it isn't tiring. It doesn't, because it just feels lovely. So, it's a very important area for everybody to experience. And if you're working from trauma states and anxiety states, with the trauma state, once you can trust the delicacy of the breath that can breathe us, it's extremely healing. And I've been through this process with colleagues and multiple patients where they can slowly get this connection to the tide, and it can heal them. It can really heal them and heal their trust.
Amazing. Wow, that was very inspiring. I have a feeling that that's one of the reasons why I was guided to be in Costa Rica for 3 years, because just the level of immersion in nature and the tide there, I was just constantly co-regulating my nervous system with nature for 3 years, and totally transformational. One thing I was curious about, because I'm just learning about this long tide, as soon as I heard the phrase, I was like, this is really important, whatever it is. It just landed for me.
Agree.
One thing that I've noticed, if my nervous system is dysregulated when I'm at home in Costa Rica, and I'm out driving, I live close to the ocean. And so one of the things that I will do to self-regulate my nervous system and come into this place where I feel like all of a sudden, like, my nervous system is like unshakable, is like I'll go into the ocean and lay just for like 10 minutes, float in the ocean and let the waves of the ocean just rock my spine and I just feel like there's something that happens where the waves are rocking my spinal cord, and I just let that happen for about 10 minutes. I get out and I'm like, feel so solid.
Because you're
Can you speak to that? What's happening here?
Your sacrum is it. You know, when you're being held by the ocean, you're floating. Your sacrum frees itself up, doesn't it? It starts rocking for itself, and this kind of craniosacral rhythm that we tune into when we're working is kind of, it's not the tempo is slightly different than a tidal tempo, but it gets you in touch with the fluidity. And we're all made of fluid, and so when we're working, what we do when you bring someone to a place of neutral, everything becomes to fluid, and we become a fluid body. When you're in the ocean, you are connected to a huge fluid body, right? And so your fluid body coheres with the bigger fluid body.
Right.
What I like doing in the ocean is floating in the ocean and feeling the connection of all of the oceans of the earth. So this whole massive connection. It's a beautiful feeling, isn't it?
Amazing. So is that what I'm doing by floating and letting my sacrum really relax and my spinal cord be kind of rocked by the ocean waves? That is rocking. I had a feeling that there's something in there that's connected to the philosophy of craniosacral.
Because the sacrum, when it's free, does rock backwards and forwards. 3, 4, 5 times a minute. Yeah.
So this is a practice for those who live near the ocean that we can do. If you don't have, a masterful craniosacral practitioner in your region working with the ocean, I'm curious, what other ways can we work with the principles of craniosacral as self-healers?
Yes. Okay. Let me think about this. One simple practice, actually, which again we can make a meditation of at some point, is to engage with. Well, there's a few different things. One is we can engage with our fluid body, okay, and we can meet the potential for fluidity within us, so we could become a fluid body that's breathing, right? That's a very important one to do. Another one, especially if our brain is facilitated or irritated, we can actually get a sense of our brain and our spinal cords. If we're sitting, the brain and the spinal cord are floating, okay, in cerebrospinal fluid and other fluids, okay, and the brain is actually being held up by fluid. And so it's actually, the brain weighs a fraction of what it actually physically weighs because it's floating, right? And often when we're irritated, our brains don't feel like they're floating, they just get agitated. And if we actually get a sense that it's like a tadpole, the brain, and the tail is the spinal cord, but they're floating. And if you tune in to the floatiness, the fact or the ability or the sensory experience that the brain and the spinal cord are floating, and even if they're not floating, you tune into the potential for them to float. Right? If you get a sense of the potential for them to float, then they start to wake up. And once it starts to float, it starts to, because our brains get really locked down, especially if we're thinking, our prefrontals, our frontal cortex gets locked into thinking, and you can see it almost like the furrowed brow is thinking. There's no floatiness under there, right? So literally at the end of the day, if you've been doing too much thinking, you can just allow your brain to float again. and it floats, and it has this slow rhythmic breathing, and you can just tune into this natural rhythmic breathing of the brain. And the ventricular system and the cisternae, which are the water beds of the brain. So everything is just in fluid, okay? And it stops being so when it's being used too much.
Yeah, or it gets overheated.
Yeah, exactly.
Starts to like...
And it can literally cool it, exactly, yeah.
So what, as self-healers, what could we learn about the cerebrospinal fluid that would help us self-regulate or be more active operators of our nervous system?
Okay, can I just step back one thing? Okay, the first thing that we must do if we want to self-heal, and to me is the most important thing, and that comes from osteopathy, is we have to re-attune our attention towards our health, okay? If we can do that, everything else falls into place. So what happens is, in life, we are attuned to feeling what feels wrong in our bodies, okay? And, that can be the sore leg, the whatever else that doesn't feel right, that I'm hungry or I'm sad or I'm sick, or it doesn't matter. What doesn't feel right is where we orientate our attention, right? That's how we've been trained to do so. It's necessarily important. Like, for example, if we're hungry, we need food, or if we're in pain, we need to move that arm away from whatever's causing us pain, say it's a fire. So there's a very important reason why we have an orientation to what doesn't feel right. But when we're in a chronic state of sickness and not being well, we are totally attuned to what doesn't feel right. So when I'm working in the Daisy Clinic, where you're working with children with complex special needs, and we're training osteopaths to work in pediatrics, and the first thing I teach them is try and find what feels good, what feels well, because actually if you tune into the health, actually it's a really important thing when you're working with sick children, because if you tune into what feels wrong, their lesion fields, they've got some of these children, because they're coping with so many different things. It's exhausting for the practitioner, it's exhausting for the patient.
Right.
So the first point is we tune into our potential health. What does that feel like?
Like the potency.
The potency. It feels like what feels nice, what feels alive, what feels potent, what has a lightness to it in our bodies. And so if we re-attune ourselves now, so what happens if you try and do that? If you just close your eyes and try and feel somewhere in your body that feels nice, that feels soft, that feels delicate, that feels fluid, that feels quiet. What tends to happen, especially if we've got pain, is the pain shouts at us. You say, I hear you, pain, thank you for that, and I love you, but I'm going to just tune into this other thing for a minute. And you tune into what feels nice and what feels delicate, and it moves, right? But the interesting thing, of course, is what we tune into, what we place our attention on, grows.
Yes.
Yeah, simply. And so the most important and most basic technique in self-healing is to attune ourselves to the potency for our health.
Yes, potency and ignition. These are two concepts or two terms that I was listening to an interview. Potency and ignition. So we can take that as self-healers, those concepts of tuning into the potency inside of ourselves and igniting it and kindling it and letting that part of us.
Just bringing our attention to it is enough, because it does it all.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we had a question about what. For us would be helpful to know for a layman or laywoman about cerebrospinal fluid, and is there any way we can work with it if we're not a trained craniosacral person? So
the practice that I just did, where you do where you feel the tadpole, when you feel the brain, that is tuning into the cerebrospinal fluid, okay? Because it's the cerebrospinal fluid that is in the water beds, right? And so that attunes you to this cerebrospinal fluid. So the cerebrospinal fluid is, it's interesting, because I was just giving a lecture in London, a course in London on the neuroendocrine immune system a couple of weekends ago. And in cranial osteopathy and craniosacral therapy, Sutherland, who was the founder of it, talked a lot about the potency in the cerebrospinal fluid, and Dr. Still, who was the founder of osteopathy, talked about it being the highest known element. And what's fascinating when I was researching these courses and talking about these things is some of the most up-to-date neuroscience talks about the importance of the potency in the cerebrospinal fluid as something that actually acts. For example, it looks like it's the cerebrospinal fluid that helps to program a lot of the development of the brain, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of the techniques that we're teaching about working with the function of the nervous system, you're looking at working with the potency in the cerebrospinal fluid, which is really important for the immune system, for the nervous system, for all of these different systems. It carries a lot of these different things and acts in a very powerful way, even in a physical way. There is some research that gives us the understanding that actually maybe the cerebrospinal fluid is actually expanding the brain when the brain is in its growth and development. So we make a huge amount, we make 50 milliliters a day of cerebrospinal fluid in the choroid plexuses, which are in the third and fourth ventricles of the brain. Where does this go? Okay, this actually bathes the brain. It's very important. Another recent research has talked about this whole process when we're in shortwave sleep of all the cerebrospinal fluid moving from the area around the brain called the subarachnoid space. It moves into the ventricular system, and it moves in and out in a very slow, very rhythmic way. And this is exactly what we would do as osteopaths or CST people when we're giving a certain techniques which actually help to move the cerebrospinal fluid. So actually, often when I work an awful lot with autistic children. A lot of that, what I do nowadays, is to restore the normal fluctuation of the cerebrospinal fluid, because it acts partly to detoxify the brain while we're sleeping. And if you can get these channels to be functioning in their full and effective way, it really helps their brains to detoxify at night, and actually they really move on, which is very exciting.
Beautiful. I see lots of comments here. Sandy says, the universe expands. Lucy says, is this being recorded at all? Would love to be able to listen again. Well, Lucy, as I shared, I'm not sure if you were on the call earlier, Ian has just this week joined as a teacher on Insight Timer. So you can, if you want to keep in touch with Ian, there's a couple ways to do that. And he's just uploaded a few tracks. So, and I totally get it. I mean, when I first listened to one of his talks, like I said, I listened to it like 3 times in a row, and I was like, I need to listen to this at least 5 more times. But let me see. So one of the ways you can get in touch with Ian is if you go, we have a group called Friends of Prema Gaia. You can find that group by scrolling all the way down to the bottom of my teacher profile, and then you can pop a message to Ian in the group. Or you can send him a friend request here on Insight Timer, Ian Wright, and you'll see the country Ireland, and that's how you'll know it's the right Ian Wright. And yes, what else? I wanted to just also say, for those who need to pop off the call right away, we are almost at time, but I think hopefully we can go a little over because there's lots of people who have questions. I would love to invite you also to take a moment if you need to pop off and click the green follow button so that we can stay connected, and that because I do live streams every single month, a couple times a month, so I'd love to stay connected with you. And also please take a moment to join the group Friends of Prema Gaia so we can keep the conversation going. You can ask questions to Ian in there. So JG says, thank you for joining Insight Timer, Ian. And Mira says, okay, so let's see here. JE says, okay, let me see. Lots of, I see Becca is here. Hi, Becca. Amit says, love, peace, and hugs to everyone. Beautiful. And Ola says, I love to go on kids swings. It feels liberating. Okay, so lots of loving comments. I will send all of these. 8 Bill says, I find ocean breathing, Ujjayi breath, connects me. Your teaching about the tide, mist, and horizon stillness is so very supportive. I listen to the local crows in the pre-dawn, which helps too. Beautiful. So every comment that you put in the chat, like I said, I will send a Google Doc to Ian so he can read through all of your loving and supportive comments and questions. We were talking in the description of this live about specific tools to actually start the rewiring of the brain from anxiety, working with neuroplasticity. I'm wondering, Ian, if you could share a couple of the breaks to do with, you have like the hippo break and the amygdala break. So working with the amygdala and working with the hippocampus to start to actually work productively with them now as adults.
Yeah, what it's to do with these different. What I'm trying to do is highlight different ways in which we can change our access point if we're in an anxious state. For example, it very simply, the hippocampus, as I said before, is about applying a context, right? So you have a feeling like terror, right? You bring your consciousness to it. What is that terror? So when you bring your awareness to it, what does that actually feel like, and what is that about? And so you may suddenly go, okay, I'm identifying with a feeling that, I don't know, whatever, I'm not good enough to do my exam tomorrow, say, for example, and so what you have to do is, in that situation, so you have to step out of that and go, okay, well, hang on, the last exam wasn't so bad. Or maybe it was, but most likely it wasn't. It was okay. And a lot of our actually anxieties are not based in actually any form of reality. So we bring in other parts of our brain very simply to say, give it context, give it understanding, but also be kind to it and say, okay, I understand that, but actually it's going to be okay. They're very simple things. Deeper ways to reprogram your brain is to do practice like getting on the tide every day, working with levels of stillness in yourself and feeling stillness actually, behind all of the sounds that are around us, there is a stillness, okay? It's the same as that stillness that's in our hearts, but it's actually outside of us. So on the edge of our hearing, behind all sound, there is a quality of stillness, and we can access it immediately. Right? If you're in a state of anxiety, you can feel that. And that stillness can center us and bring us into a place of quiet. Okay? And so then after a while, you start to be in the world within the context of the quiet. And so any noise and any irritation or any problem that comes up is within this greater ocean of quiet or peacefulness, let's say. And then the brain can desensitize, defacilitate. You put the fire out almost, and everything can go quiet. And just, it gives your brain a break, doesn't it? That's all. Yeah.
I was reading in the book about hippo break and amygdala break, and there's another one. One of your practices that you teach is about I think about going to a place that feels warm and safe inside of your consciousness, a memory, and then feeling the felt sensations.
Yes, it's
Which one of those
very
is
simple.
it?
I can't remember. Sorry. but that kind of practice, for example, the key thing again is, where do we place our attention? So if my attention is, because anxiety, our attention is in quite a vague place. It's in a vague, not sure where, there are certain thoughts and feelings come up, but you sit in this place where it just doesn't feel very nice or very safe, and it's quite often can be vague, or it can be specific worries about whatever's going on. All we have to do is well, not all we have to do, because sometimes it's very hard to do, but if we bring our consciousness and our attention to something different, right? It can be a thought, a memory, or an idealized place, or with a person who you feel safe. If you actually think about or get a feeling, what I talk about is the feeling sense of something. So it's not just a thought, it's you feel it out. If you feel what it feels like to be with someone you actually feel safe with, properly safe with, right? Without an emotional context or anything like that. Somebody who in the past or in the wherever who you've actually felt safe, and you can imagine being hugged by them, right? And what does that actually feel like? And how does that feel in your heart? You see, you can access that memory, right? And it has a direct physiological response in your body. Mm-hmm. And you have the incredible power to take your attention to wherever you want, right? Mm-hmm. It's so powerful. You can be in the most horrible place, like you're in a prison or something, but actually you can be living in paradise because it's where your attention is. And if we can take control of our attention, it can give us a great pathway to liberation, I think,
Yeah. I think the HeartMath Institute has done research on this very similar dynamic of like bringing to mind and bringing to heart someone that you feel extremely safe with. And I just went there myself inside, and maybe some of you on the call did also, just tuning into that person that you feel really seen and safe and relaxed with, and letting that grow. And I think the HeartMath Institute has done research that you can work with that and expand your heart's electromagnetic field, and all of it can be measured, can actually be measured through these like reading things that they have. But anyway, I feel like some of the principles, there's some overlap between what Ian teaches with the HeartMath Institute's research, and also even some of Joe Dispenza's work. I was reading in your book, visualizing and feeling the felt sense of something going really, really well. I think you have that in your book too, don't you? Maybe not. Anyway, so many other questions. Okay, guys. Let's see. So, 8 says, oceanic serendipity. Hippocampus looks like a seahorse.
Yes.
And that's how it got its name.
It's true.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. And so I wanted to, who on the call has been exploring working with flower essences? In my course, I have a 10-day course called Vagus Nerve and Nervous System Self-Regulation here on Insight Timer. I think some of you have taken the course. I talk about, and one of the, maybe day 8, I think I talk about flower essences and working with flower essences. So I am just getting onto that path. And Ian, I heard that you've made hundreds with your wife.
Many, yes.
Different, so each, apparently, from what I'm learning, each flower has like an archetypal frequency that can support us in our personal growth or our healing or our well-being.
Yes.
Tell us what you know.
I started making actually flower essences, maybe 25 years ago. And I was out in the woods out here actually in County Tipperary, and I just had this interaction with a birch tree. And it was very interesting, and I just suddenly went, I have to make flower essences. And so I started making them, started discerning them. And so what I would do is I'd get my children, who were very young and going for a walk, to hold the flower, and I would discern what it did to them and got a sense of what it did, how it affected their physiology and how it affected their emotional state. And I would write it all down, make the essence, and made... And I'm still doing that, actually. And this is the one thing I always say to my wife: we have to get these flower essences out, because I give them to people. Well, here's the universe knocking on your door. I know, and because they're so powerful, because they have an imprint of whatever it is in nature, right? Which is an imprint for the potential health, and I've seen the effect of flower essences. I would always give them to my patients if I got stuck, right? But the most incredible things would happen with these flower essences. And for me, it's very much a medicine of the future. And every flower has something that's beneficial to us humans, and it's an incredible thing. And my perception is only this far, and I'm thinking if I could see the whole thing, it would be incredible. But even with what I can get a sense of, it's incredible how they can affect not just emotional states, but whole physiological things.
Amazing. Okay, what what could you share to the people on the call who are just starting to work with flower essences and they feel like they don't really feel much and they want to feel it, but they don't really feel it, that you're taking it?
So when you're, okay. Now, is this making them or taking them?
Well, if you go to the health, and for those who don't know, you can go to a health food store and usually there's a brand called Bachs, BACH''S, and there's many different, you're probably familiar with Rescue Remedies, most well-known, but there's all different flowers have a different frequency. So if people have just gone to the health food store and picked up like vervain or whatever the thing is, and they're not noticing much.
So if you're wanting to, say, test an essence or a remedy or a homeopathic thing, if you tune in, if you quieten yourself down, soften your breathing, allow yourself to feel a little bit fluid, just get a sense of something that feels a little bit fluid in you. You can practice that. If you're a little bit fluid, you pick it up, and when you pick this up, whatever, it's a piece of food or it's a flower essence, whatever, does this open me up, expand me, my energy field, or does it close it? Simple, right? So you pick something up. That's how I go. That's how I choose all of my nutrition or things that I take. I don't look at what they are. I just touch them and go, oh, that one feels good. That one will suit me. Or I'll do that with wine as well. Say, which one feels nice, Mm-hmm. So it's learning to become more sensory, to actually learning to feel. The flower essences, the Bach flower essences are well documented, and there are certain ones that offer certain emotional states. So if you look up what kind of emotional state is predominant in yourself, and maybe try that if you can't feel it. But try, especially if you're very sensitive, you can start to get a sense of if something feels expansive and good for me or not. And then once you've got that little sense in there, it's easy. It becomes easy because oh yeah, that feels nice. That doesn't, Try it. Most people who can't do that, I teach this on courses of testing stuff in a little way like a kinesiology. But you're not using the muscles, you're just using your whole fluid body, really. Mm-hmm. And people think, I could not possibly be able to do that, But actually, it's a little. Everybody has a great sensorium. We just, our minds block it.
Totally.
And our education.
Do you feel that people that had trauma that then created defense patterns, sometimes like unwinding and dismantling some of that will help facilitate for them to resensitize their attunement?
Yes and no. So because it's often people who've had trauma say, for example, if there is a sensor, some part of them that is slightly dissociated, they can be hugely sensitive, right? People who've been in trauma can feel the room very much in the way like an autistic person would, or someone who's trained like me. So actually they can be highly sensitive, but the problem with it is that actually because of the trauma, they don't trust what they feel. And so, and it has a context to it, and most of the context is overwhelm. But actually that part of them that actually is sensorily open, it can be actually very helpful, actually. So actually, as the process often the process when you're working with people who have had trauma is to allow them to slowly be able to inhabit their bodies again, right? To be safe enough to actually physically, their fulcrums are all over the place and in the room, and you slowly allow them to feel safe enough in their bodies to actually be in their bodies, and that's a massive process for a lot of people.
Beautiful. So as we begin to bring our call to a close, I'm wondering if you, do you recall the vagal break that you have from your book? I know.
Yes.
Okay. Would you be willing to guide us in a short practice with the vagal break so we can kind of like ground down together as we begin to wrap up the call?
So, very, very simply, when we extend our out-breath, okay, what we're doing is we're stimulating the parasympathetic side of the nervous system, of which the vagus is the key player. Okay, so the simple way is to breathe in through your nose, if you can, if your sinuses allow that, and then say count to 2, and then hold it at heart a little bit, and then breathe out through the mouth, but not for sort of 3 to 4. So you're extending the out breath. But you don't have to do a powerful throw it out breath. Just let it gently breathe out through the mouth. And as you breathe out through the mouth, right, you just let your energy drop. Let everything go down, ground, soften. Okay, so in breath. And then, and as you breathe, you naturally drop, don't you? And this can, of course, make you very vagal very quickly, which can make you dizzy if it's too fast. So you have to just be gentle with that. In breath. So as you do this, you're obviously breathing out more carbon dioxide than oxygen that you're taking in, which you shouldn't do for too long. But this is a really lovely thing to do if you're feeling anxious. Right? If you're anxious in the moment, if you're, you know that the energy goes up and you're feeling nervous and stuff like that, just allow this just to drop your energy. Breathe in, 1, 2. Breathe out, 1, 2, 3, 4 through the mouth. Right? Simple practice. Yeah. And what's quite nice to do is to if you're running around and you're feeling completely anxious and stressed, is just sit down for a second, right? Drop your eyes, doesn't matter where you are, and just do that simple breathing for like 60 seconds, and you can find that bit of you that has a connection to some quality of peace. And the thing with this and with all of these practices is the more you do them and the more you bring your consciousness to them, and the more you identify that sense of peace that you get with that, the more you know it. And it's like going home. And then you start to go home. And the more you go home to that place of peace, the more your brain starts to rewire itself.
Beautiful. Amazing. Well, I invite you all to drop some hearts and love. Give Ian a little love blast to welcome him as one of our newest teachers on Insight Timer this week.